Welcome into the Bite Meat Podcast. Now, let's do this for a change here. We always talk to some great pit masters. We've talked to the fine folks over at Heart Brand, Jordan Beeman. He's joining us today before. But today, the way I put the label on it is decoding meat labels, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate. You walk into the grocery store, Texas Star Grill Shop, which, by the way, brings us this podcast every week, whether it's that or HEB or Kroger or wherever, and even really, Heart Brand. You go on to, heartbrand.com. It's awesome looking, but do you really know what you're looking at? And what's the background on all these meats? It can be a little bit dicey doing that. Do want to remind everyone to subscribe to the podcast if you get a chance. Anywhere you get your podcast, iTunes, Spotify, any of those. But of course, we always recommend Podbean. Podbean is where we host it, so you can go back and listen to every single podcast we've ever done and subscribe and get some great barbecue talk, some great meat talk. We've done spices, we've done pits, all that stuff. But Jordan, first of all, thanks for joining us. But I gave you a heads up of what we wanted to talk about here. And I know you're well ahead of the curve, but I feel like I'm I feel like I'm very knowledgeable. I've been doing this my whole life, been cooking, been in barbecue competitions, been cooking my whole life. Sometimes I look at a label and I'm like, what's that again? I don't remember. All I know is, obviously the grades, the choice, the prime, etc. But do you get that a lot? Let's start right there. Do you get that a lot? Like people saying, okay, we know Heart Brand is at the top of the game, but what does this mean when they look at the labels that you guys have?
Yeah, we do get that a lot. And we get that because there's so much out there. There's so much stuff that people are trying to put on a label to grab our attention, to be what would be the buzzword of the day or the buzzword of the moment to try and get somebody to buy. So it runs the gamut from saying USDA prime to just prime to saying all natural to saying grain fed, grass fed, all those other things. And it really does get confusing on all the things that someone can put or find on a label.
Yeah, and we're going to get to all those that you just mentioned, but let's start, beyond what we just mentioned, of when you're looking at a label, what should be the standards? Maybe not the upper echelon. We'll get to some of that, but like when you pick up a label of meat, a lot of people like to look at the meat, myself included, but briskets is the easy one. Briskets is the easy one because you see the marbling. You can see some of the things that maybe are good for you on the tip, on the flat, etc. But like if you just happen to pick up ribs or maybe even a pork roast, but beef in this case, what should be the standard of what people should say, okay, that's a good, honest cut of meat right there?
For sure. So the first thing you look for on, let's pick brisket specifically, a beef item, is you look for the grade. So if you go in somewhere that have the grade, you want it to say USDA prime or something similar to that. So if it says USDA prime, it really has to be graded USDA prime. That's governed by the United States Department of Agriculture, the American Meat Service. But if it just says prime without the words USDA in front of it, that's not actually governed. So the first thing you have to look at is for the grade and whether it has USDA in front of it or just the word prime or just the word choice, because then it actually doesn't have to meet that specification. So the highest grade you can find on one is USDA prime, and then one below that would be USDA choice, and then the bottom of those gradeds would be USDA select. So I think the first thing you want to look for is the grade itself. What is the grade? But you get into the Wagyu type products like ours, it might not have a grade on it. Ours specifically doesn't have a grade on it. So when you get something that's unique, you just have to go by the packer quality and the specs of the packer to make sure that it has that level. But we're talking about unique stuff, less than 1%, less than 2% of the beef industry. So, in general, most people need to look for USDA prime or USDA choice on their brisket. And then the next thing to look for is, since it's a raw item, it's not going to have a lot usually on the label. It's going to be a pretty simple label, usually put on by the grocery store, maybe a small label that's put on by the packer, but it's not going to have usually a whole lot of things of how it's processed, how it's not processed, or anything like that. One other thing to look for is all natural. And there's a couple different kinds of all natural. There's all natural with no asterisk, and then there's all natural with an asterisk. So if you get all natural with an asterisk, you got to look and see what that asterisk means. And usually it means minimally processed. So for that, it means all natural for most kinds of meat. Most meat is minimally processed. So that's one of the things we have to look for is the all natural specifically, and what kind of all natural it means. And then the other things you can look for if it's grain fed, grass fed, but that's not going to be on a whole lot of brisket labels because most of those briskets are coming from a major packer and they're not labeling them like that.
All right, you just uncovered a lot that I wanted to talk about. You said major packer. I think
Yeah.
that okay. Let me not bury the lead here, because I do this. If I go into Texas Star Grill Shop and it just says Heart Brand on it, I'll trust it. So let's start right there. If it says Heart
Yeah.
Brand, you're in good shape. But not a lot of people, whatever. You're out of town, you grocery store, you're picking up different things. You said major packer,
Yeah.
and I think that is a key thing that maybe some people don't pay attention to. And a small packer might be a lot ahead of cattle or beef or whatever, but it's still small compared to some of these majors. Define that for us, like a major packer versus
major packer.
Yeah.
There's 4 major packers that control roughly 80% of the USDA of the US's, not the USDA, that control. Let me just start over. There's 4 major packers that control roughly 80% of the U.S. beef supply, and they're roughly in this order: Tyson, JBS. Those 2 are kind of number 1 and 2, and then Cargill, and then below that would be National. So those are the 4 major packers. So if you go into a major grocery store chain, our big Texas regional chains, they're going to be buying the vast majority of their beef from those major packers. 80% of their beef, probably more than 80% of their beef, is going to be coming from those major packers.
Yeah.
And major packers don't put a whole lot of labeling on brisket specifically. And that's when you go buy a brisket at your local big box grocery store and you buy a 14-pound brisket in the original bag, that's still going to be in the original bag from the major packer. And you can usually look and see what label they have on it, if it is Tyson, Swift, something like that. And then also, if it's from one of those big major packers, it'll most likely have USDA Prime on it, or USDA Choice, or even lower USDA Select. And why I want to talk about that, even, we produce specialty meat and we're super proud of the special meat that we produce, but we're a tiny piece of the industry. The vast majority of the beef that we eat, even myself, when you go out to eat or something like that, when you're not eating at home, it's coming from a major packer. So I think the buying public really needs to be educated about how they buy that beef as well, because they still produce really good beef. 12% of the beef that they produce is USDA Prime on average.
But at the same time, someone like you as a consumer, I want someone who I know is taking extra care, where it's not necessarily. This is not a pun. It just kind of like a cattle call. It's not just like one after another. Where the smaller. I guess we can call them boutique, even though they're major companies, but kind of boutique companies like yourself.
Boutique's the right word, especially at this scale. Where we're producing 400 head a week, which sounds like a lot, but our country produces somewhere around 500,000 head a week. Fed, steer, and heifer, and we're producing 400. So I mean, we're extremely boutique. And then there's even one level below us. There's major packer, regional packer, which they might have 1 or 2 large packing plants, and they might be processing 2,000 head a day, something like that. And then there would be boutique like us.
And so what's the difference, for you guys? I know, you're proud of it. It's one that I'm very loyal to myself, but what would be the difference from a consumer perspective, what they're getting?
Yeah. So I think the biggest difference is going to be marbling. So that's what we push. I mean, we push beef eating experience, and we drive beef eating experience by marbling and using a specific breed of cattle called Akaushi, which is a specific type of Wagyu. But what I would like to push and say is that just because we're getting our beef from a major packer, a big packer, I still think that meat is just as safe, potentially even the most safe, because those guys have the best food safety. They have the best protocols in place. And that's why we contract our processing with a large scale regional packer, because they're able to still operate at those super high level food safety. They're able to have all those intervention steps and everything they do that, just say we had our own plant, we wouldn't be able to put that investment in that these major packers and really large scale regional packers are able to do. So I think that's what helps keep our beef supply as a country super safe, super healthy. But now when we get to quality, or we get to trying to feed cattle a little longer, trying to feed them a little extra grain, trying to work with a specific breed that we know that marbles more, then that's where those major packers, they just aren't able to do that, because they're after volume and getting as much throughput, as much out of it as they can.
Sure. And, we went through this when we spoke a couple of months ago, 3 months ago, maybe. Just for those who are wondering, they heard you say Akaushi, which is a brand of a type of Wagyu. Explain the story again real quick for those who may not have heard the first podcast.
Yeah, so brought a group of Texans brought over a small group of Akaushi from Japan in 1994. My family first got acquainted with the breed in 1998, purchased the assets in 2006, the cattle in 2006, and then we built a branded beef program specifically around Akaushi beef, to where we sell highly marbled, what we think is the best beef eating experience possible, direct to consumer, food service, and retail as well. So we've made it our kind of life's work, our mission to get this beef out to the beef eating public. And we're super proud of it. And it's something that we think creates a wonderful beef eating experience. And it's more than just great flavor, great taste, but you even get a chance to know the rancher, get a chance to know the people behind it, and really feel like you have a connection with the food that you're eating. And that's why we say beef eating experience, because when you eat beef, it's more than just eating, right? You can get a lesser protein, you can get something else to help fulfill you, get you calories. But when you have beef, there's so much enjoyment that it goes around that, and such a good time to spend with family.
It's just special. I don't care how much money you have or how little money you have to allocate. If you get an Akaushi Wagyu steak, it becomes an experience. Even if it's just a Thursday night, or whatever, it's like, hey, we're having this tonight. So that's what you're talking about, correct?
That's right. And it gives you something to discuss about the intricacies of the flavor, the tenderness, and how it bites, and the juiciness, and even something to talk about your friends the next day about that steak you had. If you eat some random type of protein, you don't celebrate that, but you celebrate and discuss the beef you have.
Absolutely. I don't talk about necessarily, the pork chop I had the night before, but I do talk about the steak. And for clarity as well, correct me if I'm wrong, all Akaushi is Wagyu, but not all Wagyu is Akaushi, because that's
exactly right.
That's the particular breed of cattle that you have, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
And so you get into the Wagyu. Now I'm going to get into some other things that, we're talking about different levels of beef here, but I'm gonna get into some other things. But let's talk about the upper level. Someone who wants to splurge. There are also letters A5, A4, whatever it may be. Explain that process. So when people say, because a lot of times you want to flex a little bit. I'm getting a Wagyu. I'm getting this or that, and then it has the super high grades. What are those? What should people be looking at there?
There's two different ways that the Japanese specifically. So when we say A5, that's the highest rating that the Japanese government will give. So like there's USDA Prime, there's A5. That is a grading system that's used by the Japanese government. So there's A5. I guess there's there's probably A1, but we don't ever get A1 here. I've never really seen it. It might be somewhere else. But what we predominantly see is A5, A4, A3. And A5 is that stuff that's super marbled. That's like 45% intermuscular fat in the beef, like almost half white, half red, that you see it just like the super, super nice establishments that they're charging, $40 an ounce for or something like that. Just the crazy expensive stuff.
I call it meat butter.
Yeah, that's exactly. Because it's mostly it's half fat, right? And then the Japanese also have a BMS scale, which that goes from 1 to 12. So A5 would be somewhere like 9 or 10 through 12. And then, and I don't know these numbers exactly, but notionally this is correct.
Sure.
A4 would be somewhere like an 8 or 9. So there's the BMS scale, which goes from 1 to 12, which in my mind really just covers marbling itself and depth of marbling. And then the A scale, which A5 being the highest, and that covers more than just marbling, but marbling is one of the main things that goes into that.
This is fascinating. Let's get to some of the other things that people see. Go ahead.
Can I say one more thing on that?
Yeah.
So we cannot raise A5 beef in the United States. It's a very important notion. A5 beef has to come from Japan to be true A5. So somebody could raise something that could be similar to A5, but A5 beef has got to come from Japan. Yeah.
And so when is it the USDA that actually grades these? Someone from there goes to all these to your place and to other places, and they the process, as I've understood it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I probably am, is they take a piece or a segment, a needle, whatever it is, and they grade that piece, and then all of a sudden they grade that whole piece of meat that way, whereas sometimes it might be more marbled somewhere else. Like even if it says choice, it might actually look a lot more like prime in the grocery store, correct?
Yeah. If I may kind of word that a little differently, I've never seen
the process. Yeah.
So how I've seen it work, and in multiple plants, is They first rib the animal, which means
Mm-hmm.
they split the animal at the 12th and between the 12th and 13th rib. So that's roughly right in half of the animal. And why that's so important is the ribeye is down and the strip is up. So they split the animal for grading purposes between the 12th and 13th rib, which is also between the strip and the ribeye.
Okay.
Then that animal is rolling on it, moving on a chain on a rail, and then a USDA grader is looking at it, and he's looking at the animal extremely quickly, only looking at it. I've never seen them take a sample of any kind.
Okay.
They're looking at it, and they're either grading it prime, choice, select, or no roll, which are non-graded would be more equivalent to say non-graded. We use the slang term no roll. And if they grade it select, they tap it one time with their grading. If they grade it choice, they tap it twice with their grading handle. And if they grade it prime, they tap it 3 times with their grading handle. And they're just looking at it.
That's it. They just go boom. And then you guys are taking or someone is taking the hint from them or the information.
And then
from
further,
them.
like literally 5 feet down, the employee of the plant is rolling a prime on it, or rolling a choice on it, or rolling a select on it. So that's where the term no roll comes from, because the animal doesn't get rolled. It's not getting rolled with the grade. Even more so now, they're using a camera to assist the grader. So a camera is taking a picture of it. It's a software program that's been, I guess, approved by USDA. And then the camera is suggesting to the grader what that carcass should grade. And the grader can either accept or reject that. The grader has the final say, but they're very much looking at that camera and then looking at the carcass to see. And then a few other things the grader's going to, they're looking at yield grade. They're looking at age of the animal by the ossification of their bones. Because if an animal's over what appears to be 28 months of age, it doesn't get graded prime, choice, or select. Doesn't mean the meat's going to be any different if it happens to be 29 months or 30 months. It's just, I'm pretty sure it's 28. It's close enough to that. But it's the line that the USDA has established for whether an animal can be graded or not. So, and why you say they just look at that one portion. So you're right. They look at that one portion of that one piece of that carcass, and the other end of the strip could grade more or it could grade less. So sometimes we have people who have one of our strips and they send us a picture and it doesn't have as much marbling as what happened where it gets graded. And that happens. There's times that animals do not grade evenly across the animal because it's not graded by the cut. It's graded by one piece of the animal.
One little area.
And the Japanese grade at about the 4th rib. They grade between the chuck and the ribeye, which has more marbling there. An animal in general marbles from front to back. So the chuck's going to be more marbled, the ribeye's going to be marbled, and then once you get to the strip, little less, and once you get to the round, when it's hanging upside down, the top end of the animal, or what would be like the hind legs, it's marbled the least.
And so the brisket is basically like our pecs, right? Like on a human body would be right here. And so that would be more on the upper end, more marbling, more fat.
That's right, closer to the head and the more marbled.
But also tougher because they use those muscles.
The brisket specifically, yes.
Yeah, and that's why we have to slow smoke them so much.
But there are some. I don't think toughness of muscle is determined by location of the body near as much as marbling is, but front to left, because there are going to still be some relatively tender muscles in the front of the body, like the top blade.
And it also has to do with how that whatever it is, a steer, is handled. And it kind of comes back to the boutique guys versus the big guys. You like my scientific terms there? The boutique guys versus the big guys. Because you guys, like, how do you handle yours? Because obviously you have a very quality, piece of meat out there grazing.
For sure, yeah. So we start out with a specific breed. So that's the beginning of what we do. Is we use a specific breed that's known to marble, and what we think is the best beef breed for beef quality. Then secondarily, we feed the cattle all natural. So we never give them any growth promotants, any added hormones or anything like that to make them grow faster, get bigger, add more muscle. Because we know that takes away from beef eating experience. We're not saying that's any better or any worse or the right way to do it completely or the not, but we're saying we know it makes an animal more flavorful, more tender if you don't give it added hormones or give it growth promotants. And then we don't feed them any antibiotics, and no antibiotics while they're on the full feed. We do believe in healthy cattle, and we do believe in treating cattle like we treat our children. So we will give them therapeutic antibiotics on a case-by-case basis while they're still at the ranch, but none while they're on full feed. So therefore, there's no antibiotic residue in any of the meat.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest things of what sets Heart Brand apart
Mm-hmm.
is the breed. We feed them longer as well. We'll feed them closer to 350 days than the industry average of maybe 200, 250 days. Because we know the more feed they get, the better chance they have to marble.
Right. And beefier, no pun intended, as well. So that kind of takes me back to how we started, kind of decoding all this stuff, which this is really good. I really appreciate you joining us because it's very fascinating. But I've also seen on labels, and I don't know, in the industry, how this happens. You would know before me, but I've seen Wagyu style on a label. Where it says it doesn't say it's Wagyu or USDA or whatever. It just says Wagyu style, and I'm like, all right, well, that's not. I mean, there can be a little bit of, I guess, deception, for lack of a better word, on some of these. Correct?
Yeah, there can be, depending on what it is.
Mhm.
And I don't know what Wagyu style specifically means.
I've seen that myself.
Uh,
I think it's just trying
unlike
to,
unlike a ground beef or a sausage or something
I don't
like that.
remember exactly, but it said
Okay.
Wagyu style. And I was
Wagyu
like, okay, that's a little weird for,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
me.
it sure could be that they're trying to get the Wagyu name on it without
Mhm.
being legit Wagyu,
Yeah.
which is very
Mhm.
possible. And you know what else? What's important to know? Putting Wagyu on a label does not mean the beef is going to be marbled.
Mhm.
So Wagyu is just a breed claim. It's not a marbling claim. It's not a quality claim. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Now, the high-end Wagyu guys like myself, and there's some other
Mhm.
really good ones out there, they're trying really hard to marble and make really good beef and put Wagyu on it. But just
Mhm.
because something has something that says Wagyu doesn't necessarily mean it's highly marbled or a better beef eating experience
Yeah.
as well.
Okay, so let's get to some other things people might see on the label. Grass-fed, grain-fed, and whatever else might be there. Kind of take us through that.
Yeah. So grain fed means that it's fed a high energy ration, a lot of grain, and we think that's what helps it marbled. And then grass fed's a label that people are trying to get put on there. And so I'm not in the grass fed world. So first
Mhm.
off, let me just tell you that, I don't, talking
Mhm.
about Wagyu and prime and choice and how they grade animals like that, that's center of the fairway for me.
Yeah.
Uh, we don't produce grass fed, but what I do know, a lot of grass fed gets imported, and they get people to sign an affidavit that says it's grass fed and comes from another country, and they get it to the grocery store and it says grass fed. We're not into grass fed because I don't think it creates a great beef eating experience. So it's not
Mhm.
something that the business that we're in. But I do just would like to say, just be careful with your grass fed. Make sure where you're getting it from, because I live in Texas and we run out of grass in the summer. We didn't even
Yes,
have
we do.
grass a month ago before this nice last rain we had. So a
Yeah.
lot of the grass fed does come from other countries, does have to get imported from places where, it's closer to the equator where they get more rain or something like
Mhm.
that. But
Yeah.
it is a USDA term, something that the USDA does monitor is that grass fed term. But
Mhm.
it's not something that I really study a whole
Yeah.
lot up on.
So tell us about grain fed. That is your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
What makes you sort of committed to that and understanding that it's probably the way to go.
Yeah. What commits us to grain fed is animals need energy to marble. Marbling means fat. So an animal needs more energy than it needs for its daily maintenance to be
Hmm.
able to add that energy to fat. So if
Okay.
we're just taking care of an animal, giving it all it needs for its daily maintenance, then it doesn't have the chance to marble much. So we
Hmm.
need to feed an animal more energy than it needs just for its daily maintenance. And when it gets more energy, it turns that into fat, which turns it into marbling. And we're of the extreme opinion that an animal needs marbling to have a superior beef eating experience. Now, that
Hmm.
is just an opinion, but that's an opinion that would be shared by the vast majority of Americans who like
Yeah.
grain fed beef.
Hmm. The other thing, and this was, hey, I'm going to fall on the sword here. I always heard this when I was younger, and it took me a long time to realize it's not necessarily the case. I've always heard, well, the beef in the Midwest is naturally going to be better because it's cooler weather, not as torrential summers. It's not as hot, and the beef marbles better or is more tender. I used to believe that, but what is the reality here?
So the reality is that there is a lot of truth to that statement.
Hmm.
It's not a rule, but there's a lot of truth to that statement. So if you look at grade by plant or grade by region, the Texas region is going to grade like roughly 8 to 9% prime.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the U.S. region, it's going to grade roughly, the whole U.S., it's going to grade roughly 12% prime. And then if you look at the good Midwestern plants, Nebraska, the good plants kind of are in Nebraska areas where the best plants are. They might grade up to, I haven't looked at them in the last few weeks, but they're going to grade 15% prime, 16% prime, something like that. So where you have Texas at 9, the whole country at 12, and then the best Midwestern plants at somewhere 15. So by and large, you do get more marbled beef from the major packers from the Midwest. Now, what can change that is the boutiqueness of meat packers that still can be located in the breed. Yeah, the boutique, the breed who are working on a marbling breed who are located somewhere outside the Midwest. And we're Texas based, so we feed most of our cattle in Texas, process them in Texas, and we can hold our own. And actually, our last grades, this calendar year, have graded about 82, 83% prime. So we really beat the U.S. and the Midwest average by a whole lot. But that's because of the breed we're using and because we're feeding them longer. And the other reason why the Midwest can grade so much better is because that's where the corn is. So one thing to remember, the corn in Texas that we buy has a basis, which means basis means more or less than the market price. So the Texas basis is positive, usually a positive 80 cents to $1. It's been a little higher than that recently, up to $1.20. If you're in, heart of Midwest Iowa, your basis is going to be negative, somewhere about minus 40. So when you have about $1.60 advantage, maybe $1.20 advantage when it's not as strong, you have the ability to feed those cattle more corn. And when you feed those cattle more corn, get them bigger, feed them longer, they grade better. So that's another reason why the Midwest as a whole has a better advantage, is because that's where the corn's from.
Yeah, but it's not necessarily a rule as you just laid out. It's just in a general sense.
In a general sense, it's true, but it's not a rule.
Yeah, so that's where the old term, he's a corn-fed guy.
That's right.
He's a corn-fed guy. All right, so a couple more things here. We talked about how not all choice and prime cuts are created equal, et cetera. But one thing that we see occasionally, and I'm not going to ask you to be a scientist here. In fact, I mentioned this before we came on the air, but you always hear about like nitrates, and you touched on a little bit about, maybe some of the, you don't necessarily give this cattle a lot of, outside, whether it's medicines or whatever. I know you need to give medicines occasionally, but you know what I'm saying? Like what is it, just in a general sense? I know you're not a scientist, but we play one on our podcast. What does that mean?
Yeah. So nitrates is what we break down to being called cure, which cure is what you add to where we make sausage, which is what you add to sausage to make it have longer shelf life, help it have better flavor, and help it have better color. So we're of the opinion that sausage, bacon, hams, those kind of further processed things, but we'll talk about sausage specifically, needs that cure because it gives us better shelf life, the flavor, the taste. That's what we like to have. And even stuff that says no cure added probably has something called celery powder in it or some kind of beet in it, which is a naturally occurring type of cure. And we'll use cure, which is nitrate, kind of the big wider range of things. Yeah. And I'm actually in favor of it. I think that's what really helps our product be safer. Not just my product, but our product from the whole country. It helps it be safer, helps it have better shelf life. And also allows us to have fresh sausage, not fresh as in frozen sausage at our local grocery store rather than having to have everything frozen because it gives our shelf life longer. It gives us better flavor. To me, I think it makes the product taste better.
Yeah. And so on just a little background here now on what you guys are doing, you mentioned this last time we spoke as well, where you guys are and how people, can get a hold of you and maybe see what you're doing, some of these things. Cause it's very, if you're in this game, even just as a backyard pitmaster, this is informative, but it's very interesting, why people always say, and we've had the greatest pit masters in the world on this podcast, Aaron Franklin and Malcolm Reed, and just go down the list. We've had them all on here. And the first thing they always say is the most important thing about your backyard barbecue is get the right meat. Get the meat first. That makes the biggest difference. So what can people learn about where you are and some of the things that you guys are doing?
Yeah, for sure. So our website, we have a direct-to-consumer platform on our website, heartbrandbeef.com. And then also in Houston, we have a great relationship with the Texas Star Grill Shop, and super fortunate to be able to do business with those and Rick Martin and all the guys. And then we're in Kroger as well, and most of the Krogers in Texas, and Food Town has a pretty good supply of our products as well.
Oh, nice. All right. So natural, organic, those are other things. I forgot to get to these. What can you tell our listeners about those terms that they might see on meat?
Yeah, so organic goes all the way down to what the animal has to be fed. So the animal's got to be fed an organic diet. It can't have anything that has any fertilizers in it or anything for weed control or pest control. All the way up to the animal can't really be given, I don't think, hardly anything to make it grow faster or anything like that. So organic is way more of a way that the animal and the land and what the animal eats, how it's been treated. And organic, again, doesn't have anything to do with more marbled, more flavorful, better for you. Organic is just a growing process, the way the animal was treated and the way the animal, the feed and stuff was handled before it.
Yeah.
Natural.
Go ahead.
And then natural would be less. Natural would mean natural in the biggest sense of what natural means an animal is naturally fed. So it's not given any growth hormones, not given any added hormones or steroids or things like that. It doesn't mean that the corn that the animal eats is organic. It can still be fertilized corn or things like that. So natural, it just more pertains to the process of the animal and its growth and its feeding, not the step before that.
And so you're saying, and I would have thought otherwise, because whenever my wife is real big on organic vegetables and fruits, and I can kind of taste the difference in fruits and vegetables between organic and non-organic. But you're saying that doesn't necessarily matter on beef.
Well, I'm not saying that it doesn't matter.
In terms of the taste, in terms of what.
Because there's people who do organic and who try and do it and make the beef taste better. But there's organic that doesn't necessarily mean the beef is going to taste better. So in my mind, it doesn't make the beef taste better. But say you have one specific brand who one of the steps they do is organic and that helps the beef taste better. It might be. But as a blanket statement, organic does not mean better quality, better tasting beef.
That's awesome. All right. So when we go to our favorite store and pick up brisket from Heart Brand, take us through what that piece of meat is. In terms, we've talked about all these things, natural versus organic and grain fed versus grass. What is in that piece of meat that you guys do?
Yeah, so it's natural, never given any growth promotants, never any added hormones. So it's all natural, and then also it's going to be highly marbled. So it's going to have a lot of marbling throughout that beef. Going to be a high end grade, and it's going to also be akaushi, which akaushi is going to give it that rich buttery flavor, and it's going to have a higher amount of mono unsaturated than saturated fatty acids. So as well, that beef is, when you feel it and you touch it, you can actually feel that fat and those oils on your hands much differently than you do traditional beef.
Sure. How many people are in your realm that can offer Wagyu, legitimate Wagyu, that do it your way, maybe a boutique? Because it seems like there's more and more people trying it, but it's hard to get. I mean, you just talked about it a little while ago. Like you have to, it was a process bringing, the old story. It was before your time, is that they literally put Akaushi cattle on an airplane and flew them over here. Like, so how difficult is that process of, people out there who are doing this?
Yeah, it's very difficult because it's very time consuming and very capital intensive. So just imagine you have an animal born and say you want to take that to beef. It takes 24 months before it's ready to be turned into beef. So, I mean, just that outlay of capital is very, very time consuming. The direct answer of how many people there is, it's a small group, especially on the ones that do it at our scale and our quality. Well, there's still quite a few more out there who do 10 head a year, maybe even up to 20 head a year, but there's not many that are doing it at our level with the level of food safety and the volume that we're able to do it at. Maybe 5 in the U.S. We're the second largest Wagyu producer in the country.
Okay. All right. Well, that's awesome. What a fun discussion, man. I mean, I learned something. I learned a lot, and you guys have just been kicking butt. And obviously, I would highly recommend people give it a shot. It's pretty much, in terms of certainly brisket, it's all I get anymore. I'll walk into. They already know my path over at Texas Star Grill Shop. I'll go over to that far right corner look at a couple of briskets, grab a Heart Brand, then I'll go get my pellets or my wood or my whatever, and then I come back and get some of my OG sauce that I have, and go from there. I've cut a path already through that store, so I highly recommend people doing that. Really appreciate you joining us. Before we let you go, anything else you want to talk about? People who want to maybe get a hold of some of this great Akaushi Wagyu.
Just check us out. We heartbrandbeef.com, and appreciate you having me on today, and hope I was able to provide the listeners with a little bit more information and hopefully help them have a wonderful beef eating experience at home.
Big time. You did it big time. You should be in the business. So I really appreciate it, man. That's Jordan Beeman. Coming up next is our smoking hot tip of the week, and we'll get to that right now.